Yeah, let's bow. Dear God, thank you so much for bringing us all here tonight in our homes, but still together. And thank you for the chance for us to just kind of take a break and pause on our lives for a little bit to be able to truly focus on you and to do that in the presence of sisters in Christ and to just be able to join with each other and to engage with each other and to learn from each other. And dear God, we do have several prayer requests tonight. We ask that you please be with Jen's fellow teachers in any situations that are going on there, any problems or conflicts, and just please help everything to be resolved and help the teachers to be able to join together and do what's right for the kids and for themselves and to be able to work together. And dear God, please be with the Morris's brother-in-law who was recently in an accident. It sounds like it's pretty bad, but we know you're bigger. So just please be with that family and give them strength, but also be with the doctors and the people treating him and please help him to pull through and to show your strength and your power by healing him. And dear God, please be with the Maynards and the Densoas and the Lopez families as they have lost loved ones recently, and give them peace and comfort as they handle the downside of living in a fallen world where we do all have to pass from it, and things like this do happen. And dear God, just please be with them and comfort them. And dear God, please be with so many others on our prayer list at church. Please be with Don Hens and Marilyn as she tends to him as well as he continues with his Parkinson's. Please be with Kevin Cook and the issues and the complications that have arisen with his leg. Please continue to be with Shelva, and we praise you for the improvement and the healing that you've given to Terry Irwin. Please be with the Braley family. There are, between her dad and her brother, and of course Georgia has her health issues, at times as well. So dear God, just please bless the Braley family and give them the comfort and the strength that they need. And dear God, we also praise you for Donna Williams's foot surgery that she seems to be healing well. And we thank you so much for that. And we ask continued blessings there. Please be with Levi Bowles, Morgan Botchneck's sister's nephew, to be so little and dealing with so much. Please be with that family and help them to turn to you. Please continue to be with Karis and her healing, and of course Kurt Maxwell and that whole family. We thank you so much for Brenda's continued healing and Jamie's continued healing, and as well as Esther Gellis and just the whole Casillas family, as she has good days and bad days, but seems to be improving. And so, dear God, we thank you for all the work that you do in our life, the path and the journey that we're on, wherever we are in that point. We just thank you for being with us and showing us your power. And dear God, we just ask that you continue to stay close, but we ask that you help us to continue to seek you out and to stay close to you, because we know that that's important. And dear God, we ask that you please be with our nation and be with our church and be with our elders as we continue to go through the ups and downs that have always been and will always be, but are certainly present. And so just please help us to always be united and to be focused on you. And dear God, we thank you so much for your son, Jesus, because that is what truly unites us. And we just thank you so much for giving us the chance to have that salvation so that we can have hope, and so that the ups and downs of this world are not the finish line. And we just thank you so much for that. And we ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
All right, so our song tonight is a song that we are all familiar with, but we are more familiar with just the chorus. In fact, I myself did not know that there were actual verses, but Jen really wanted us to hear the verses, and they are great. But we don't have slides for it, so you know the words. It's Awesome God, and you can follow along pretty easily. Listen, the verses are actually a solo part, and so you can just listen carefully and hear those, and then sing the chorus as we continue here in our study.
God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God.
wasn't putting on the Ritz.
Our God is an awesome God.
There's thunder in his footsteps, lightning in his fist.
Our God is an awesome God.
And the Lord wasn't joking when he kicked him out of Eden. It wasn't for no reason that he shed his blood. His return is very soon, and so you better be believing.
Our God is an awesome God.
Yes, we know that he's awesome.
Our God is awesome.
And he reigns
From heaven
with power and wisdom.
power and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God.
And we know that he's awesome.
Our God is awesome.
And he reigns
From heaven
with power and wisdom.
power and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God.
Now when the sky was starless in the void of the night,
Our God is an awesome God.
he spoke into the darkness and created the light.
Our God is an awesome God.
The judgment and wrath he poured out on Sodom, his mercy and grace he gave us at the cross. I hope that we have not too quickly forgotten that
Our God is an awesome God.
yes, we know that he's awesome.
God is awesome.
And he reigns
From heaven
with power and wisdom.
power and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God.
And we know that he's awesome.
God is awesome.
And he reigns
From
with
heaven
power and wisdom.
power and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God.
Yes, we know that he's awesome.
God is awesome.
And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Power and wisdom. Our God is an awesome God.
And we know that he's awesome.
God is awesome.
And he reigns with power and wisdom.
Power and wisdom.
Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God.
Okay. So obviously we've been talking about light, and tonight is about a big fire. So it's kind of funny, as I haven't been able to join real time yet with the class, but I watch it afterward. And it was kind of funny, Gretchen's class last week. I was like, oh, there's probably a reason that it kind of worked out, because it wasn't necessarily in the topics, but that I wasn't teaching the be still and know that I'm God part, because that's definitely the one I need to just listen to, because I'm not so good at that. But the fiery part typically is kind of in my wheelhouse. So I don't know, maybe that's why it happened this way. But tonight we keep moving through the story of Elijah, and we get to the part of the story that we're all probably fairly familiar with, but we are going to actually read it all the way in case anyone didn't get a chance to read it. And because I do always feel like it's better to read God's words than me talk, because you might pull something out that I'm not even pulling out, but that's what you needed to hear. So we will actually be reading the whole chapter in a little bit, but I will say that I ended up kind of going off book again. I don't know how that even happens, but all of a sudden I just start thinking about something else, and I just kind of follow that. And so I try to hit as much as I can of the stuff that she was bringing up, but I definitely bring out kind of a different point, I guess. Like Cassandra's points are fantastic. I don't know, kind of went in a different direction. So anyway, there we go. Okay, so just kind of a recap, just in case you haven't tuned in, or just in case, I don't know, I always feel like I like the timeline and I can see all of the events that build up to something. And so I just kind of wanted to recap everything that has led up to this point. We're all pretty familiar with, Saul, David, and Solomon. That's when the kingdom was united, and the only time in the Israelite history when the kingdom was united. But Solomon ends up, by the end of his reign here, he built the temple. He was so wise, but he goes off the rails toward the end of his reign, basically worshiping other gods. So God ends up dividing up the kingdom into two, the northern and southern kingdom. Jeroboam gets the northern 10 tribes besides Judah, because he had done such a great job when he was under Solomon, but then he ends up worshiping other gods. And I've got in there like, what's up with the golden calves? Like, why why golden calves? But we see the golden calves emerge again. But so worshiping other gods, and then Jeroboam becomes the yardstick for evil kings. And what is his main evil? It's worshiping other gods. That's what really distinguishes him from I always think, well, David did bad things. Like, how was he a man after God's own heart? Like, why were his sins, like, why did that not seem to matter as much or whatever? And really, there was something about this lesson that, like, this book that I'm like, there's what it is. It's always the worshiping other gods. That's the thing that puts these kings into this category of being just abominable to God. A few more kings come along after Jeroboam, also bad. Omri comes in, and his son helps him Ahab until Ahab ends up taking over, which is who we'll be talking about tonight. They're amazing from a secular standpoint. They create great wealth and power for the nation of Israel. They conquer lands. They, from a secular standpoint, you would say, wow, they were a great president, but they worship other gods. And so that's the running theme always, that really sets these evil kings, the kings that are defined as evil in scripture. It's because they worship other gods. We see Ahab, again, top notch politically. He marries Jezebel, not a great choice. She's a priestess for Baal, so she brings Baal with her, and Asherah kind of hops in there as well, the goddess that kind of goes along with Baal. But there's a huge focus in the kingdom now of worshiping other gods, specifically Baal and Asherah. And then we have Elijah from Tishbe. He tells Ahab, last week we learned that he tells Ahab, hey, there's not going to be any rain until I say there's going to be rain. He then just leaves. He spends some time at the Kerith Ravine, which I've always heard it as Cherith, but Casandra called it the Kerith Ravine, but spends some time there, being fed. God sends ravens and puts cakes out for him and everything. Then he, after that all dries up, he goes and spends some time with the widow at Zarephath. We see this story where her jar doesn't run out of oil or flour. We see a whole little thing where her son dies, but God resurrects him through Elijah. And so that's kind of what has led us up to this point. But we see this as far as in the kingdom, constantly worshiping other gods. And that's the big problem, which we shouldn't be surprised, because so in one of our favorite movies, Ice Age: The Meltdown, there's a whole scene where the little sidekick guy, he says, the first rule, and I even forget what it is, but then there's a whole funny thing that he's like, what's rule number one? And so in our family, we always, when things, are not going right, we're like, what's rule number one? So this is what's rule number one. We know the first commandment, I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. We see that in Exodus, and of course in Deuteronomy when it's repeated. Even in the New Testament, when Jesus is asked, what is the greatest command? He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. He's really clear. God is really clear. This is the most important rule, that we are to have no other gods before him. And I think sometimes that gets lost on our generation. I'm not completely sure, but we're going to talk about it a little bit. So as we have been studying Elijah, I guess, typically the story of Elijah is kind of a lesson about an example of a man with great faith and patience and courage and everything. But really what Elijah's lesson was to the people, and the lesson that I want to try to focus on tonight is about worshiping God and keeping him as our focus. And I think it is just as possible for our generation, obviously, to lose focus of that. And we'll talk about idols in a little bit too, maybe not so much in an idol way, in the way that we see here in the scripture, but that we lose focus on God and we worship other things. But it's also because as I was reading through all of this, and we do this with Bible lessons, we kind of make it about us, and I get it, and we need to, that like what things do we need to glean from it, and how do we need to change, and what is our response to it and everything. But there's a lot of inward focus, and in this one, it is tempting, and typically it is kind of taught that, well, how are we like Elijah, and what are the lessons that we can glean from Elijah? How are we not? But again, why is our attention on Elijah? So I'm going to try to make this about God, but you're going to see even by the end, and I know it happens, like I derail a little bit too, because it's hard to not put it back on ourselves, but because, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need to do that as well. We need to be looking at ourselves, but but you're going to see I flop back into it, but I'm going to try to kind of keep it on, let's just focus on God, and let's focus on how powerful he is, and that he is a living God, because that's what the Israelites had forgotten in our story tonight. They forgot, they just didn't see him as alive. It was kind of some ancient God that wasn't really relevant, and so I want to try to have us focus on that, and really try to think about that, and how God is powerful and he is alive today. And that's kind of the lesson I want us to take really quick, because kind of roundabout, go back at it again. I do also think it's worth mentioning that Elijah was not confronting outsiders. I feel like we also get a little bit tempted when we are studying this to be like, oh, this is just like in our world today, people do, and we talk about people outside of the church, we talk about just people in our society and everything, and we kind of make the parallel that Elijah is dealing with the people in his world, and he is, that's certainly his world, but we need to remember who he's dealing with is God's people. Ahab was the king of Israel. So the more probably equivalent, I guess, metaphor might be, that if our church, or if brothers and sisters in Christ were straying, and maybe even elders or leaders of the church, or and so I think that it's worth mentioning, because I do think that's a lesson that we don't really talk about maybe as strongly, but sometimes we need to be careful of that and guard ourselves as well. And see, again, I go back to us, but guard ourselves as well, and to really just I guess just look at our church a little bit too. We tend to get so focused that, oh, well, that's a problem from the outside, where sometimes there are problems within well, and we need to deal with them. And so let me see, I'm already behind on my notes. Let's see. Yeah, Israelites. Yep. Okay. So let's kind of talk about idols. The thing that fascinates me with idols is I kind of don't relate totally. Do we understand or relate to idols? Why or why not? And what are you, when we talk about idols, because it's obviously a big part, certainly of the Old Testament, but even in the New Testament, we see there's still idol worship. What are your thoughts? What are everyone's thoughts on idols? Do we really understand that nowadays, or relate to it even?
Jennifer, idols are what people put above God and they worship. And yes, we do have them today, because people worship their cars, their house, their money, even their kids, they worship them above God. So yes, we do have idols today.
What about like carved images? Because these people were actually creating figures, and they were worshiping these statues as if they could do something. And I mean this because, like, it is just one, myself personally, it's just hard to wrap my mind around.
Yeah, I don't know, let's see, it's probably been like 9 years ago. Bill and I went to Nashville, and we'd been to that little Parthenon there before. There's that mini Parthenon. Is it Artemis? Is that who it is, Diana? Anyway, we went there again, but this time when we were there was food placed there on the ground for this idol. I mean, and it was very odd. I've not, of course, forgotten it. There are physical idols, and certainly, Buddhas and Hindu gods. I mean, there are things, like Sandy says, that we put ahead of God, which make them idols. But there are those graven images that people worship still too.
I think it's a lot harder for us to relate to the graven images, though, to the idols, to the statues, to those kind of idols. I understand what Sandy is saying and absolutely agree with her. However, I'm with you. Like, I just don't even get that at all. Like having this figure or this statue that I'm worshiping.
It
So,
just seems like they really believed that. It just seems so crazy to me, but obviously they did. And so it's definitely kind of an interesting aspect. I've got on here. So would you truly worship a carved piece of wood? Like, why would someone do that? And then,
Well, um, Jennifer, another thing is, if you think about like the Catholics that have images of the Virgin Mary and the cross, and while those are good things to remember, some of them, I think, and I could be totally wrong, but I think some of them worship those images, not that they think, but they do. They pray to the Virgin Mary to help with whatever. And so I think they believe that Mary will intercede for them. Now the cross is a little different, but I know just that symbol quite frequently, and not just Catholics, a lot of people, I do think, worship, I guess you could call it worship, the Virgin Mary. And so that to be considered an idol.
I know my dad's side of the family, very strong Catholic. And my dad was raised very strong Catholic. My grandma was in the Legion of Mary. And so 100%, they pray. I mean, my grandma prayed to her sometimes, I think, more than God. And but definitely and but I don't know that she ever prayed to like the actual, and she had a whole little thing in her house, that had it was basically like the little shrine of Mary. But I don't know that she ever, like, I think she says, oh, it's like a picture hanging in her house, to pray to this actual thing. And I guess that's where, but obviously that is kind of one of the issues with the Catholic Church. Do run that danger, and that's at least a possibility, because there are people that do that. It seems really foreign anymore, and it seems like something that would have happened so long ago. But that's interesting, Lynn, that you were saying that evidently not. There's people that, I mean, there's food sitting there that, and I think the Buddha, shrine to Buddha, that's a good example too, that they set out the food and drink and everything for people that follow that. But I do think what's interesting and notable, and maybe even a good thing, I guess, I've got, why did people of biblical times insist on physical leaders? The Israelites wanted kings so bad. Please give us a king. We want a king. We want a leader. Would we, and I don't know if it's just an American thing, but I mean, typically, I feel like most of us probably on some level feel like our leaders get in the way. And that in some ways we maybe almost wish that they just weren't even there. and we don't, I don't feel like, at least, that that at least, again, and maybe it's uniquely to American, but I don't feel like we necessarily long for a physical leader. And in the absence of one, it's not like, well, we need one, we need someone to lead us. And again, maybe I'm wrong about that, but because even that is foreign to me. Like when, the part of scripture where the Israelites are, they want a king like the other nations, that why would you want that? Things are pretty good for you. Why do you feel you need a king? And so but I do think they definitely felt, and that's where I wonder, is it even a little bit of a humility that, do we not have that they recognize that, well, people need a leader. And I don't know that I see that as much, at least not, again, maybe it's just the United States, but where we feel we need that much, and that we look for it and long for a leader. Again, maybe I'm wrong. Thoughts on that?
I think for the Israelites, I don't know if it was as much that they wanted a leader, but they wanted to be like other nations, and the other nations had kings. And so they, I'm sure, truly didn't know what that and how much trouble that was going to end up causing. But I wonder if it was just the fact that it wasn't necessarily the leader. They just wanted to be like other nations. And, when you look at other places, you always think that they have it better than you do. Not always, but a lot of times you think they have it better than you do. And so, they may have looked at these wealthy places and thought, they must have it all together. Well, they have a king. So maybe that is what is the deciding factor. But like for today, I don't know that we crave a leader, but I do think we crave rules. I think people overall, if they'll admit it, are happier when there are not necessarily tons of rigid rules, but you need guidelines in, like they say with kids. Of course, I don't have kids, but they say, that kids crave structure and knowing what is okay and what is not okay. And so I don't know if maybe that, if that could equate to what they were feeling. I don't know, but God gave them everything they needed. And that's the thing that's just so, that they're turning their back on there. I think that's just, they're looking at other places thinking they've got it all. We want that.
And that's what I do just find it interesting, because even Jeroboam, when the kingdom split, he immediately, oh, well, we need gods here. And, of course, it was because he was afraid of losing or in them returning to the southern kingdom. But, here, I'll set him up in Dan and Bethel. We'll set, because he knew that people would go looking for a god. They wanted a god close, so he gave them another god. And I guess it is partly because I'm like, oh, wow, I feel like, so many people, do they even look to other religions? Or sometimes I feel like atheism is the bigger thing that we battle. People don't want a god. they're absolutely rebelling against any kind of a god, or at least they think they are. But and so but it's just an interesting, the whole idol thing is definitely just an interesting thing to me. But so I've just got there, are we different in that respect, or who do we look to for leadership? But what we're actually going to come back to this kind of mindset, but I'm just kind of throwing some things out here to think about as we head into the lesson. But
before one more thought on this. I mean, I feel like sometimes, it's easier for people if they have that image to believe that God is real. Does that mean, it's not right. We don't need an image of God, but I feel like, we can't see God. So it's like, you can see the results or the effects of God, but you can't really see him. And so sometimes it's easier not to follow him in that way. But then if you have this person or this image that you can think of and whatever, I think people might find that easier.
that
Not
makes
correct,
sense.
but but easier.
But yep. Did I freeze up there for a minute? I'm sorry if I did. I'm getting a note that says my internet connection is unstable.
You did freeze up for just a second.
Okay. And I'm right down here near the box. That's why I come down in the basement, so I can be a little bit closer to the with all the good wires. But okay, yeah, I do like that. That actually does help a little bit, that just needing something tangible to be able to hold on to and to look at. Like I said, come back to idols here in a little bit too. I did want to get into this story. So the part tonight is 1 Kings chapter 18, that he had been in Zarephath, and now he's called to go confront Ahab. And so kind of just, he meets up with Obadiah a little bit. They gather the Israelites up on Mount Carmel. He lays out the contest at the Baal prophets, and then we've got God through Elijah going through the contest, and then we see some repentance and a slaughter, and then finally the rain to end this drought that they've been in. So that's kind of the brief overview of where we're going. And then I know that it's a lot, but I really just think it's important to read God's words rather than just, you know, and I know sometimes for expedience sake, we need to paraphrase it, but one, just in case anyone didn't have a chance to, but I just think I'd like to read through it all. So we're literally going to read through the whole story. Would anyone like to read so that you don't have to listen to me? If not, that's fine. I can read it, but just in case.
I gotcha.
Thank you, Gretchen.
Is that the ESV? Because I can see mine better.
Yes, it is.
Okay. After many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah in the 3rd year, saying, Go, show yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth. So Elijah went to show himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab called Obadiah, who was over the household. Now Obadiah feared the Lord greatly, and when Jezebel cut off the prophets of the Lord, Obadiah took 100 prophets and hid them by 50s in a cave, and fed them with bread and water. And Ahab said to Obadiah, Go through the land to all the springs of water and to all the valleys. Perhaps we may find grass and save the horses and mules alive, and not lose some of the animals. So they divided the land between them to pass through it. Ahab went in one direction by himself, and Obadiah went in another direction by himself. And as Obadiah was on the way, behold, Elijah met him. And Obadiah recognized him and fell on his face and said, Is it you, my lord Elijah? And he answered him, It is I. Go, tell your lord, behold, Elijah is here. And he said, How have I sinned that you would give your servant into the hand of Ahab to kill me? As the Lord your God lives, there is no nation or kingdom where my Lord has not sent to seek you. And when they would say he is not here, he would take an oath of the kingdom or nation that they had not found you. And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here. And as soon as I have gone from you, the Spirit of the Lord will carry you, I know not where. And so when I come and tell Ahab and he cannot find you, he will kill me, although I, your servant, have feared the Lord from my youth. Has it not been told my Lord what I did when Jezebel killed the prophets of the Lord? How I hid 100 men of the Lord's prophets by 50s in a cave and fed them with bread and water? And now you say, Go tell your Lord, behold, Elijah is here, and he will kill me. And Elijah said, As the Lord of hosts lives, before whom I stand, I will surely show myself to him today. So Obadiah went to meet Ahab and told him, and Ahab went to meet Elijah.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so here we meet Obadiah. The thing, again, trying to focus on more God than even, what do we see going on here? We see when we compare Obadiah to,
Oh dear.
in an amazing position for one of God's people, who's actually God-fearing to be in. He's running the household, and so he's got this important position. But can you and we see here that Ahab is ticked off at Elijah. There is a manhunt out for him, and this is what Obadiah has been having to deal with all of this time. And then the flip side of it, we had Elijah, who was off in a different way, having to prepare for everything. But what we see is God using these two fervent men, again, focusing on, so from God's perspective, he's got two men who are fervently following him and them in different ways. It's one of those, it made me think of with COVID and everything in the quarantine. So many people were like, oh, it's been so nice, I work from home and blah, blah, blah. So I have not been able to ever work. And because I work at a hospital. Oh, I might be frozen. Am I frozen?
You're back.
Okay. So I work at a hospital, so obviously we didn't close down through all of it. And so sometimes when people talk about, oh, it's been so nice working from home, I'm like, and feel like Obadiah, he's probably a little burnt out, and because he's been working really hard. He's got these prophets pulled so that Jezebel couldn't kill everyone, and so now all of a sudden Ahab's asking him to do one more thing, and we see a little bit of, oh my gosh, are you kidding me? But again, God's using, he knows the hearts of these men, and I think the lesson here is that God is active and that he's working and that he's powerful. He's seeing everything and he's working it all out. He's using the people, and that's what we focus on. God is active and he's working. He is a living God who's working. And I think that's the lesson to take from here, or at least the lesson, and there's lots of lessons, but the lesson for tonight. And I do also just love, because again, the nice lesson for us, again, it's hard not to bring it back to us, that we're not alone. God is living, he's powerful, he's working, and other people for us. We are not ever alone. And Elijah gets a little bit more, upset with the loneliness feeling later, but anyway, we're not alone, and we see that Obadiah was here. Okay, the next little part, we've got the gathering of Israel for the contest. Would someone like to read that?
I will. If the dogs don't interrupt. Okay. When Ahab saw Elijah, Ahab said to him, "Is it you troubler of Israel?" And he answered, "I have not troubled Israel, but you have, and your father's house, because you have abandoned the commandments of the Lord and followed the Baals. And now, therefore, send and gather all Israel to me at Mount Carmel, and the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 prophets of Asherah who eat at Jezebel's table." So Ahab sent to all the people of Israel and gathered the prophets together at Mount Carmel. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, "I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord. But Baal's prophets are 450 men. Let 2 bulls be given to us, and let them choose 1 bull for themselves and cut it in pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. And I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood and put no fire to it. And you call upon the name of your God, and I will call upon the name of the Lord. And the God who answers by fire, he is God." And all the people answered, "It is well spoken." Then Elijah said to the prophets of Baal, "Choose for yourselves 1 bull and prepare it first, for you are many, and call upon the name of your God, but put no fire to it."
Okay, so here we see Elijah's laying it on the table, but I kind of want to pull away from that, because again, we end up giving Elijah credit, but this is God. God has got this all set up. And so, and yes, he's using Elijah as his instrument, but here's the big moment. Elijah's laying it on the table. It's time to decide. But what we're seeing right now through all of this is that really patient, because we see a palace that has 850 prophets to a false god. Now we know what God's rule number 1 is, and we know how much that ticks him off. And he has been patient enough that, okay, we've got, and he's had it. It is time to decide. And Casandra brings up in her book that, these 850 men, it says dining at the table. That means that these 850 prophets, they were being housed and taken care of. The amount of money that would have been going into just taking care of these almost 1,000 people, would have been a lot. And I know back when we lived here the first time, so we're probably talking about 20 years ago, Greg taught a lesson, and I loved. He said he books that every household has that you can look at and see where their priorities are: their calendar and their checkbook. And of course, some of those are metaphorical now because we all have them on our phone, but these 2 books. And I tell you what, from the palace of Jezebel and Ahab, if you looked at their checkbook, you can see where their treasure is. You can see where their heart is, and it is not with God. And so we see here that God's like, done. We're done here. And he tells Elijah, it's time for everyone to decide right now. And then Casandra points out, and what I love here, and God really goes after Baal here. So Baal was a god, a little like certainly that controlled the weather and stuff like that. So here they haven't had rain. So where's Baal? Because if he can control the weather and everything, so that's been one little thing. But he also has a fire component to him. He's a god of fire. So God's saying, "Oh, let's go right now. You think you guys really think that this man, that this graven image controls the fire and everything? I'm going to beat him at his own, at what you think is his own game." And I've even got up here the contest. It's not a contest. There is no contest, because this is a piece of wood that God, there's no contest. But anyway, and so we see it, and we see the buildup. Elijah's laying out the rules. Here it is. we're both going to be on equal ground. I'll even give you a little bit of an advantage. And he's setting up the event to the visual representation of, you guys, everyone was quiet when he said, hey, you guys need to choose. Everyone's quiet, but we're getting ready to see that they're not going to be quiet after this. If someone else could read the next part.
I've got it. And they took the bowl that was given them, and they prepared it and called upon the name of Baal from morning until noon, saying, O Baal, answer us. But there was no voice, and no one answered. And they limped around the altar that they had made. And at noon, Elijah mocked them, saying, Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is musing, or he is relieving himself, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened. And they cried aloud and cut themselves after their custom with swords and lances until the blood gushed out upon them. And as midday passed, they raved on until the time of the offering of the oblation. But there was no voice. No one answered. No one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, Come near to me. And all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down. Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, Israel shall be your name. And with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench about the altar, as great as would contain 2 seahs of seed. And he put the wood in order and cut the bull in pieces and laid it on the wood. And he said, Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood. And he said, Do it a second time. And they did it a second time. And he said, Do it a third time. And they did it a third time. And the water ran around the altar and filled the trench also with water. And at the time of the offering of the oblation, Elijah the prophet came near and said, O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Answer me, O Lord. Answer me, that this people may know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have turned their hearts back. Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, and the wood and the stones and the dust, and licked up the water that was in the trench.
Okay, so we see a little bit, the Baal prophets, they're trying their thing and they're cutting themselves, which is definitely part of their worship. Self-mutilation was part of it. We know that the Baal worship, sexuality and prostitution was a big part of it. Child sacrifice. I mean, they did some crazy things. But the self-mutilation would have certainly been part of it, to try to arouse the gods and to try to arouse Baal. And then Casandra does point out in her book, and it's true, the whole mocking that Elijah does, it's the whole, so it's okay to trash talk a little. But we see such the stark contrast, because what Elijah's pointing out are, all the things. Is he sleeping? Oh, is he not around? Maybe he, he's out. These are all things that we know from scripture, that God is always present. God doesn't sleep. This is showing, and I liked that part that Casandra had in the book, that kind of showed like what the mockery that Elijah is specifically pointing out is showing that sharp contrast that the Israelites would have known and certainly should have known, and so we see that contrast. But Elijah repairs the altar. Again, from God's point of view, God, again, trying to look at it because our focus is on God, and what does this tell us about God? He wants and intentional worship, but he gives us memorials. We certainly have in the New Testament, we have the Lord's Supper and everything. And in the Old Testament, he gave memorials, altars and things like that, and they were done with the 12 stones. Everything was representative and everything, because again, he's loving and he understands us and he knows what we need. Those aren't for him. Those are for us, because again, he's an active and living and powerful God, and he knows what we need and he's giving it to us. And then they go and neglect it, and it's all a mess. And so Elijah's building it back up. Again, from God's point of view, this is because he knows that we need this, and he's given this to us, and because he's a loving and, again, active God. And he does give us those tangible things that, because he knows that we need, but he's alive. And then we see the contrast, Elijah vows in prayer to have the fire fall. God doesn't need a show. We had the Baal prophets, they're dancing around and they're crying. God doesn't need a show. He just needs the hearts of man. And but boy, does he give them a show. So he has all the fire fall down, and so all of this has now happened. And again, hard for us to wrap our mind around. I don't know, we just can't wrap our mind, or at least my mind around, seeing something like this, and what I like to see, and their reaction. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And this does make me feel like, is on Judgment Day, when Christ returns, and and there will be, every knee will bow and everything. How do you deny seeing something like this? Although Ahab seems prophets of Baal, and so they don't seem to be affected, but certainly all of the Israelites are affected by this. And the title up here, it was no contest. It never was a contest. And God shows his power in that, well, I'm definitely alive, and you've forgotten me, and I'm kind of ticked off. And now if someone could read the last little part of the chapter.
I can read it. And Elijah said to them, "Seize the prophets of Baal, let not one of them escape." And they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and slaughtered them there. And Elijah said to Ahab, "Go up, eat and drink, for there is a sound of the rushing of rain." So Ahab went up to eat and to drink, and Elijah went up to the top of Mount Carmel. And he bowed himself down on the earth and put his face between his knees. And he said to his servant, "Go up now, look toward the sea." And he went up and looked and said, "There is nothing." And he said, "Go again 7 times. And at the 7th time he said, "Behold, a little cloud like a man's hand is rising from the sea." And he said, "Go up, say to Ahab, prepare your chariot and go down, lest the rain stop you." And in a little while the heavens grew black with clouds and wind, and there was a great rain. And Ahab rode and went to Jezreel. And the hand of the Lord was on Elijah, and he gathered up his garment and ran before Ahab to the entrance of Jezreel.
Okay, so here, again, it's tempting to be like, oh, Elijah's fervent prayer life and everything, and those are all definitely lessons. But what I see here is a forgiving and a merciful and a patient and compassionate God. He watched these people turn their backs on him for how long, and but when they repent, okay, and he sends the rain, and it's a reward. Okay, we'll start over. And so what we see about God here is that, wow, he rewards us, and when we seek him, and when we look to him and worship him, we will be taken care of. He promises that. And I think one of the things, though, he doesn't promise it if we don't. A lot of times we're like, oh, well, God promises. Well, I mean, there is some stipulation there. It's not just this, blank. It's available for everyone, but worship him, follow him, he will take care of us. And so that's what I see here, at least out of this. Yes, not to take anything away from that, Elijah, yes, what a faithful and fervent prayer life and everything, certainly a great example. But wow, I mean, look at our God. I mean, that's pretty impressive. Again, alive, powerful, yet still merciful, all of that. So then, oh, that's weird. Oh, so this was kind of to kind of go back to the idols just a little bit real fast, because now that we've read the story and kind of have that in our frame of mind, and I know we've only got a few minutes, so we're not going to get to, well, I might actually skip this part because we did kind of touch on it. It is a popular thing in our culture. I'll try to run through this really quickly. We have a program at the hospital. It's called You Matter. it's all about self-care, and we got to take care of ourselves. That's a popular term nowadays, although it's interesting. Behavioral health is the new buzzword that's hot out there is resiliency, because I think what we're realizing is that there's been so much focus on ourselves that people aren't resilient now, that when things don't work out or when it's not about you, they kind of don't know how to work. William Ernest Henley, the poem Invictus, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. There's a lot of focus on self. And so the who or what are our idols? It's a question that Casandra actually asks in the chapter. What evil in our society do you think Christians today too easily tolerate? And it's a tough one, because obviously we're definitely a society. We like to say that we can tolerate things and everything, and there's an element of that, but I think the story that we just read, there are certain things that we cannot tolerate, and that God does not tolerate. But some of the ones that we always bring up, the sex, violence, lying, rudeness is certainly a problem. Sloth, just laziness, is an issue in our society. Devaluation of life. These are all things that we kind of probably tolerate, maybe a little bit too much. Drunkenness, I even put in there over medication. Might not be actual alcohol, but sometimes, we do that, these last two here, and normalizing sin or bad behavior by diagnosing it as a disorder. These two are a little bit trickier, because obviously there are legitimate times when medication, might be needed, and things are disorders or anything. But there are some times that's not necessarily the case. But I would argue, and I guess after reading through this and everything, maybe in our society, and again, I know this is putting this back on us, which I was trying not to do, but just arrogance and egotism and self-reliance. Those aren't good things. That we are supposed to rely on God. And sometimes we even put, self-reliance, that's a good thing. We'll pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and everything. And there are elements of that within humanity, but sometimes we can talk ourselves right out of thinking we even need God. And I think we definitely see that in our society. Certainly in the United States, we're a pretty wealthy nation. And so a lot of people just don't see the need for God. They think they're doing okay. But so anyway, I did kind of want to get to, but tonight, because I didn't want to make it about us. I want us to dwell on the power of our God and the fact that he is active and that he is living. In this story, what was more impressive, or who should we focus on? The man who trusted that he would be fed by a brook. That's great. Shows his faith. Or the one who sent the ravens and cake. It's a miracle. The man who trusted that fire would fall from the sky, he asked, certainly, great faith. Or maybe the one who sent the fire, because that's kind of, again, wow, that's powerful. The man who fervently prayed for rain, or the one who forgave the people and sent the rain. The man who stood before people who may kill him, or the one who showed mercy and allowed them the chance to repent. So again, just that focus on, I think sometimes in this story of Elijah, we miss the power of God, which was literally the thing that Elijah was trying to show to the Israelites at the time. And we get focused on Elijah and what a man of faith that he was. And so, and we only have, I'm already at 8:01. I did just kind of want us to spend a little bit of time, if you want to. I know people might need to go, but do we believe and do we see God's power? I mean, do we really believe that he's alive and that he's working in our lives? And so I was wanting to spend some time tonight just kind of sharing favorite Bible stories that show God's power, or examples in our own life. So, because Elijah, he was responsible for reminding and convicting God's people of God's will and his power. And I think that that's something that, we should have times where we sit around and just talk about how great our God is, and just kind of chat about, this is amazing. We should be encouraging that and remembering to look at that, and to share stories and just talk about how awesome our God is. We talk about how awesome our kids are. Do we sit around and do we talk about how awesome our God is and the things that he's actively doing in our life? And if not, we need to, and we need to try to do that more. But anyway, so that's the lesson. I've got a bunch of stories if you wanted to stick around, but that's okay.
Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Jen, so much. And
You're welcome.
yeah, I'll definitely stick around. I'm willing to stick around, and just because I think it's so encouraging, especially when we're at times where things are just not going not going right, and there are a lot of challenges, and we need to remember how awesome our God is.
Yeah. Well, I could start with some of my stories for anyone that does want to stick around. For anyone that doesn't, that's okay. Thank you. But you know, some of the bodies, of course, I had like, you know, the parting of the Red Sea and Jericho, the flood, Jesus calming the water, you know, all of these things that we just see that physical power. I am drawn to that. There's something very comforting about that I feel like, okay, someone really powerful is in control, and that's really comforting to me. But I have a whole list of things that, and I do think it's one of those, as we get older, we can look back on our life because there's just more of it to look back on, that, oh, I see where God was working there. But sometimes, right, when it's helping, one of the ones that I had on here, I talked about my grandma who worshiped Mary. And I know a lot of you know this already. She was 9 years old when she passed away, when she was 91. I had lived out there when we lived in Pennsylvania. I was pretty close geographically to her, so we got a little bit closer, and we talked about religion a lot. And when we left Pennsylvania to come back here, one of my biggest regrets was I was just never super blunt with my grandma, and kind of sharing the gospel and sharing where she was maybe off a little bit. And I was probably a little bit afraid. I know my dad had early on when he first was converted. And so, you know, they were very young, and he was rejected pretty hard. And so I guess I just assumed, well, you know, she knows, and she read her Bible every day. She just, you know, has decided not to. But we were going out for a visit, and I wasn't even going to actually be at her house that long because I was going to go up and see our neighbors. But before I went, I was praying so hard that God would give the opportunity, that it might come up, that maybe I could have the chance to talk to her. And I even had papers all prepared just in case, you know, that opportunity would arise, and that, you know, I could leave it with, you know, scripture and all of that kind of stuff. And so I came armed. And again, it's one of those like, well, why wouldn't I think that God would have given that opportunity? I was praying for it. You know, I'm glad I was prepared, because we should be prepared. If we're praying for it, we should be prepared. And so the crazy thing was, so we got there, and unfortunately my mom and my had a horrible relationship, and they just went at each other the wrong way, and often had fights when we would go out. And my mom and dad were also with us, and within probably 10 minutes of us being there, my mom and my grandmom have a huge fight. My mom goes storming off my dad, and I'm left alone with my grandmom. And I had known some things that had happened and everything. And as we were kind of talking, it was literally the conversation. And I mean, I was sitting on the floor, she was in a chair. And as she's talking and everything, I'm like, oh my goodness, this is happening. This is unfolding perfectly. This is all getting set up so that, like, everything I prepared, it was going to fit right into it. Like, I mean, the doors that were opening, it really was kind of, it was crazy. And I do believe that that's God being active, that I mean, it could not have played out more perfectly, even though, and even God taking something that was awful, this fight that had happened, and giving it a chance. And so I talked to my grandmom that night, and she was actually ready that night. She was like, well, I need to be baptized. Now, she struggled with the whole, because some Catholic churches have actually started to immerse baptism. And of course, you know, in her head, well, she still needed to go to a church to do it, kind of a thing. And she was kind of a shut-in by that point. And so I explained, oh, no. Well, then she wanted to. So I called my dad in, and of course, he was completely blown over. And he felt like, what did you say to her? That and so he was like, you know, I want you to think about it and count these costs. Obviously this was going to be a big thing with the family. And the next morning, now I had to get going, and I went up to see my neighbors. My sister was also there. She helped my grandma get into a bathing suit, and my dad baptized her in her bathtub. And so but I mean, like, that was a moment that I was like, oh my goodness, I could not have set that better. And I definitely see that as God, such power and so actively helping in that situation. But any others? I know you guys have them. Gretchen, you have one that I have quoted to so many people. You might not even remember it, but you talked about it in a Bible class when we lived here the first time, and it struck me.
The God doesn't send checks in the mail.
That's it.
Yes, he does.
Yes, he does.
I was so worried about the finances, and I told David, I said, God does not send checks in the mail. I don't know how you can be so calm. And then the checks started arriving. So yeah, God had it all figured out.
Yeah.
Well, this is back to the Bible stories. As I was reading about those prophets of Baal and doing all of that crazy stuff that really was making God, their false God, supposedly reliant upon what they did and being so dramatic. And then Elijah just prays. I was thinking about Naaman, complaining that he wasn't asked to do more. And he was just asked to go, dip in the river there that wasn't as clean as the rivers he was used to. I mean, that's what I was, it's because it's not about what we do. It's about what God does. And he doesn't require our drama. He requires our hearts.
Another thing I think of a lot of times is the passage that says a peace that passes understanding. When something is just really stressful or whatever, and you're praying about something, sometimes I don't think we ask for peace necessarily. That may not be what we're asking for, but I find that God gives it, and he gives it in a way that's just way, way more than you could even imagine. And so I really believe that verse means what it says. It's beyond our understanding, that the peace just makes no sense,
Yeah, when I was delivering Jackson, it was taking a while for him to come, and so we were inducing him, and the labor had been going for about 24 hours, and so my epidural had been refilled a lot of times. There's the over medication part that I was talking about before, maybe not so great. And my body was definitely having a physical reaction. I was shaking. I kind of vomited through the actual delivery. Because I hadn't eaten, but then I had all these drugs in my system and everything. But I was uncontrollably shaking, and so I was trying to get that under control, and I just wasn't. And I know that people will say, oh, that was just because you were calming your mind and focusing on something else. But I would start to pray, and it was literally like my whole body just relaxed. And then as soon as I got distracted and wasn't thinking about God, or lost my prayer, it would start back up again, and I was again and I mean shaking, like really convulsing. And then I would start to pray, and it was like I mean, again, like you said, that peace that passes understanding, when we really, really turn to God, it's even physically peaceful. It can affect us physically, but yeah, certainly mentally. The peace that, that's what I always tell people at work. I'm like, oh, I'm always good on Thursdays because I've come I had church the night before and I've been reset. And it was something I'd even told my boss, because she was worried our particular department is a little bit hectic, and certainly was last year. And she was like, what are you guys doing to make sure? And I remember I was like, oh, I'm good. And it was a Thursday. I was like, I had church last night, so I'm reset. And, but it is, I mean, it's an immediate reset.
I had several experiences with my dad throughout my, and you all know he didn't come to Christ until, he was right before he died. I mean, well, he was a believer. He just had never been baptized, I mean, he was all those things. And he even told stories about the war where you could just see God working in his life. But one time, I was up here, the kids were small. We had just kind of moved back to Nashville, and he had been taken into the ER, and maybe too much information, but he wasn't able to pee. He wasn't able to eliminate. Well, they were pumping him full of fluids, and which is not a good thing. You know, those two things do not work. And so he was in terrific pain, and his bladder was just like full and over and just horrible. And my cousin was there with them, and she didn't know what to do. And she said, I've just got to leave. He's in so much pain. I can't take this. And so I was like, okay, do I run down there? What do I do? It was on a Wednesday night, and a nurse friend of mine was sitting there with me while I was on the phone, and she was saying, have they tried this? Have they tried this? And, you know, and we were trying to communicate, and it just wasn't working. And they put him up in a room, and he was still just in this horrific pain. And it's times like that when you just have to cry out to God. And I just started worshiping. I just started singing. I'll never forget it. Come thou fount of every blessing. I just started singing that. And all of a sudden in my head, it said, call your cousin. And my other cousin, I had another cousin that was down there, and it said, call Marcy. And I called her and I said, Marcy, I don't even know, her husband was a respiratory therapist, but not at that hospital. And I said, I don't know what to do. Dad's in horrific pain. They can't get a hold of his doctor. They can't get pain medicine. You know, they've done all this to him. I'm afraid he's not going to make it through the night. I said, I think I'm going to come down there. And I said, does Mike know anyone at that hospital? You know, is there anyone that we could just get someone to get Dad pain medicine? And she goes, Jennifer, you're not going to believe this. And as soon as someone says that, you know God. She said, Mike is at the hospital right now. Not only was he at the hospital, he was right down the hall from my dad. His mom happened to be in the hospital. He was literally right down the hall from my dad. And he walked down there to the nurse and he said, you are his advocate. You've got to get pain relief for him. And he went into my dad and he talked to him. He got him calm, and he felt his abdomen, and he stayed with him until the nurse got someone and got the pain meds, and Dad was fine. I mean, you know, how can you write that script? You can't. And God had that already. And I still to this day, it's just hard for me to believe like that he was right down the hall. I mean, it wasn't that he was, you know, had to go there. But anyway, there are so many situations that I know that God kept my dad alive until he was ready. And just like with your grandmother too, you know. So anyway, that's one of my stories. And I don't know that I actually heard God, but something told me, you know, call Marcy. And I never would have called her. I mean, she was on my mom's side of the family, and just so amazing. So amazing.
Yeah, that God puts those people, the thought of those people in our heads. And
with the very person that I needed to call. I mean,
yeah, I know sometimes I hedge a little bit, like I get nervous to give that so directly, like, oh, that's God working and everything. And I don't know why we do that. I don't know why we don't want to give credit to God that he's active and living in our life. But, you know, sometimes I'm like, oh gosh, people are going to think I'm crazy. But like you said, I mean, how do you explain that otherwise? And, you know, obviously, you know, people that aren't believers would say, oh, coincidence, and, you know, that kind of thing. But I think that's what the story we read, that's part of it, that like, no, we need to give credit to God and recognize that, no, he's working things out. And obviously this past, you know, year and a half or so has definitely been a testament to all that, how he's working it out. And
One of the ladies that went to church with us in Hendersonville and would teach ladies classes, she used to call them kisses from my king. And she would, just even little tiny things, just, she would give God the credit for just even, just little, even teeny tiny things that just made her life better, made her faith greater. And she would call them kisses from my king.
Yeah, it is another one that I had on thinking of that it was just a small thing, but I was the chaplain of my sorority in college, and there was a younger girl who had come to me. It was my senior year, and she was struggling with depression and everything. And I'll be honest, I really didn't know what to say, from a scriptural standpoint. And I gave her the basic things that you would think, but that was on a Saturday night that we had spent quite a bit of time talking and everything. And literally that Sunday morning, the sermon at the church that I went to was the whole sermon was on depression. I've never heard a sermon, but I'm going to talk, but that the whole sermon was devoted to the subject of depression. And there were actually a couple sermons while I was going to church there in college that I'm unstable. I think I might. But there were a couple sermons that it was like, okay, that's crazy. That was exactly what I was just talking about. And I kind of at an impasse. I didn't know what to do, but that one definitely stood out. That I was like, ugh. I was literally talking about this last night. And then the whole sermon. So that I like that the kisses from my king. I like that. We should set up some sort of a little and I'm like, kisses from my king. Set up a little chat group where we talk about the kisses from our king. I like that.
I am totally muted and I'm sitting here talking. So Seattle. This is one of the little kisses from our king that happened to me on the Seattle trip. I mean, the Seattle trip was just a great blessing after blessing after blessing, just to be with the kids. And you guys all, you understand when your family's all together, there's just some peace and comfort and all that there. But I had really wanted to see Mount Rainier. Like that was kind of one of the things that I wanted, and not to go there because I knew it was kind of a little bit of a distance, but it does kind of overshadow the city. Like you can see Rainier in the distance from the city. Well, it was cloudy and hazy, and so you really couldn't see it. We could kind of get maybe a little tiny glimpse. And then also, one of our flights had been canceled out of Chicago. And so Clay called and he tried to get our flight changed. And they did. They changed our flight without even charging us and routed us through Denver, which put us here way early, like 3 or 4 hours earlier than what we were supposed to get here. And so we get to the airport that morning and the flight like is going to be full. Like every seat is full. And I'm like, how in the world did they put us on this flight? How did we get on Saturday? How did we get 2 seats on this plane? So as we're taking off from Seattle, let me see if I don't know if you guys are going to be able to tell this or not. We literally flew by Rainier. And this is only a picture that God can paint. The sun was rising in the distance. There's a sea of clouds, and we literally flew by the peak of Mount Rainier. And I mean, how could I have ever seen that view any other time? I mean, how I just, but God. I mean, that's another thing that I just like, I mean, come on. That's an amazing view.
That's crazy.
So yeah, and just all that going together, like, how were we on that flight? How did we even get on that flight? And then to see that, and the probably thought it was crazy, anyone who didn't have their headphones in, because I just kept saying to Clay, because I was at the window seat and he couldn't see it yet, I was like, we are flying by Mount Rainier. We're literally flying by the peak. I said, can you see this yet? Can you see it? And the sun's rising. Anyway, it was so cool. But that's one of those things too that I don't want to say that that's just coincidence or that just was happenstance. I mean, how can only God could paint that picture, you know? So anyway, there's another one.
That's awesome. And flying in planes is definitely one of those, like, because you're looking down on things and I'm like, oh my goodness. I know when we went out for Jonah's Pepperdine recruiting trip, of course, California is gorgeous, and you know, everything that's gorgeous, the Pacific Ocean, I mean, everything's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
But on our flight back, I was like, you know, there's a lot of other pretty parts too as we're flying over, you know, other things looking down. I'm like, you know, it's all pretty nice. And you know, the airplane is kind of, that's a neat little gift that God let us accomplish, so that we can see, you know, see his amazing works. And yeah.